So this guy brutally unalives a man, gets away with it, and then publishes a novel about it. So the guy, his name's Krystian. He's from Poland. He's an average guy. He runs a cleaning business. But one day, the worst happens. His life starts falling apart. His business is failing, and so he has to file for bankruptcy. He's drinking a lot. He's cheating on his wife. Now, his wife is this woman, Stasia. And pretty quickly, Stasia decides all this drinking and cheating, it's too much for her. And she and Krystian officially separate. Now, this separation really gets to Krystian. He doesn't take it well. He's depressed and he wants her back. He's thinking about her all the time and he starts obsessing over her. And eventually, he decides to hire a private investigator to start following her to see what she's up to. Yeah, because that's gonna win her back. But hiring that private investigator is how he finds out about this guy, Dariusz. And Dariusz is this local man who runs an advertising business. He's a normal guy and he has no connection to Krystian. But one night, Dariusz is out at a nightclub, and that is when he meets Stasia. And he and Stasia, they hit it off, and eventually they agree to go on a date. And so later, they go out on this date, and nothing materializes from the date. They don't go out again after that. Except the private investigator Krystian hired is still following Stasia around. And he reports back to Krystian like, hey, she went out on a date with this guy Dariusz. And of course, Krystian is pissed. And one night, he gets all drunk and he goes over to Stasia's house to confront her, and boom, he breaks her front door down and he's screaming at her and he hits her, and he confesses that he hired a private investigator to follow her, and that's how he found out that she went out on a date with this Dariusz guy. In fact, he's so mad, eventually, after this, Krystian comes up with a plan to get rid of Dariusz for good. And one morning, Krystian goes to a payphone near Dariusz's office, and he calls the office pretending to be a client who wants to buy advertising. And he's like, look, I need to speak to Dariusz right now, otherwise you'll lose my business. So they give him Dariusz's cell number, and he calls the cell number, and he sets up a meeting with Dariusz later that day. So then later, Krystian and Dariusz meet up, and we don't know exactly how their conversation went, but somehow Krystian gets Dariusz into a car with him, and he drives him to an unknown location. Now, this next part is actually pieced together by forensic evidence because there were no witnesses to what happened. But here's what we know. While at this unknown location, Krystian suddenly gets violent with Dariusz, and he beats him up, and he ties him up, and he tortures him, and he holds him hostage for a few days. He doesn't give him food or anything. Then, when he's done with him, he takes Dariusz to a local river, and he throws him in. And Dariusz is too weak to swim, and unfortunately, he drowns. Then, Krystian takes Dariusz's cell phone, goes on the internet to an auction site, kind of like eBay, and he sells it to make a little money. Around 4 weeks later, some fishermen are out fishing in that river, and they see something floating by the shore that kind of looks like a body, because it is a body, Dariusz's body. So they call police. Now immediately, police look into this, because, a body floating in the river, this is obviously a murder. But unfortunately, after investigating, they find very little. And after 6 months, they still have no real leads, and the case gets dropped. Meanwhile, Krystian, he's just vibing. He's like, sweet, no one suspects it was me, because bro just got away with murder. And then, this crazy motherfucker starts writing a crime novel about all this. And this crime novel is about a fictional character named Chris B., who brutally murders someone in a similar way that he had murdered Dariusz. And a lot of the details about Chris B's life are similar to the details of Krystian's life. And Chris B, in the novel, even sells the murder weapon on an online auction site just like Krystian did with Dariusz's phone. So yeah, this fictional novel appears to be based on the actual murder that he committed. And to make it worse, then the book actually gets published. Like some publisher read this and was like, yeah, this is great. Now, at the end of the day, he only sells a couple thousand copies, so it's not a huge success, but still, Krystian got away with murder and he wrote a frickin' book about it, and no one has connected him to the crime. Until 3 years later, after the murder, a local detective is looking into cold cases, and he starts working on this one to see if he can find anything new. And Detective suddenly realizes Dariush, he would have had his cell phone on him. Like everyone always has their cell phone on them. But when they found the body, they never found his phone. So Detective gets a hold of the serial number for that phone and he finds a way to track it. And he discovers that after the murder, it had been sold on an internet auction site. And the person who sold it, their username was Chris B, like the character in Krystian's novel. So of course, they trace the account back to Krystian. So Detective, he investigates this Krystian guy he's never heard of and he deep dives into his life, and that's when he finds out about the crime novel he wrote. So he and a bunch of other police officers, they scour through every chapter of that novel looking for any details that might lead them to connect Krystian to the crime. And eventually, boom, he's a suspect, and they bring him in for questioning. But they don't get much information out of him, and they have to let him go. Oh, but it's not over, because then they get another break in the case. Apparently, when Krystian called Dariush's office that day from the payphone, he used a phone card. I guess it was one of those prepaid ones that some countries use. And so detectives discovered that a phone card was used, and whoever used that phone card that day also made other calls. Calls to Krystian's parents, Krystian's girlfriend, to Krystian's friends. So obviously it was Krystian using the phone card, because obviously he's the frickin' killer. But this phone card isn't what gets him busted. Here's what gets him busted. Remember Stasia? Well, up to this point, Stasia hasn't been super cooperative with police. Like, she doesn't really want to talk to them. They've tried to talk to her several times, but she's just one of those people who doesn't trust them. Regardless, they try speaking with her one last time. And this last time, they show her parts of Krystian's novel. Specifically, they show her parts of the book with this character named Sonia. And Sonia, in the novel, appears to be based on Stasia. And this little factoid freaks Stasia the fuck out. She's like, this weirdo Krystian was writing crime novels about me? And so, kaboom, she finally agrees to talk, and she tells police everything. That one night she went out on a date with Dariush, and how Krystian found out about it, and he tracked her down, and he broke her door down, he got violent, and he admitted that he hired a private investigator to follow her, and that then that private investigator saw her with Dariush, and that Krystian was all butthurt and super jealous of him. And that is all the info police needed. And so then, bam, they go and arrest Krystian. And I don't have a mugshot of him, but here he is in real life. This is actually him sitting in court after he got busted. And like, notice he's got like kind of a little smile on his face? What is he smiling about, creepy bastard? And so he's charged with murdering Dariush, and he's found guilty, and he's sentenced to 25 years in prison. And so, just to be clear, if he had never written that novel loosely based on his crimes, then he probably would have gotten away with it. And that is wild to think about.